Said to open later this month, Enlighten Lab is owned and operated by a U.S. veteran. He told us how floating changed his life. When Matt Gangloff finished his enlistment with the U.S. military, he was trying his best to reintegrate into society. Go to college, get a job, live a normal life. But it wasn't as simple as he thought it was going to be.
But I was really dealing with some pretty severe PTSD, depression, anxiety, insomnia, and all those things kind of snowballed into substance abuse and risky behavior and all of this stuff.
Gangloff got to a point where he was at his lowest and contemplating suicide.
That kind of triggered me to make a choice, like change your life, fix things, or don't. And I decided to work on it.
So he spent 2 years doing everything he could think of, everything you're supposed to do to live a healthy life. This included exercising regularly, regulating his sleep pattern, and repairing relationships. He graduated college, started his first business, and met the love of his life.
Everything was going great, had a great job, but I realized still there's these times where I'm just not happy. And all of that work that I did was great, and it did help, but that was what's on the surface. That's the symptom. And so I started looking for ways to kind of go back and repair the underlying issue. And for me, the thing that I found that worked the best was floating, meditation.
Float room, float tank, float pod, sensory deprivation room. It has a lot of names, but Gangloff said there are 3 basic principles to floating: no light, no sounds, and no gravity. At Enlighten Lab, Gangloff's Float Center is set to open in Missoula in late February. There are 2 different options for floating. The first is a traditional pod-style tank, and the other is a room-style tank.
People kind of newer floaters prefer the room-style tank because it feels more open and less enclosed. It's also really good for people who are a little bit anxious about getting in a small enclosed space.
Whichever style you choose, the tanks are soundproof and are equipped with a pool of water with 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt dissolved into it, making the water dense enough to allow a person to float in the pool.
So you're kind of floating with no light and no sound and no gravity, which kind of gives you the sensation of kind of floating in space.
Gangloff said the concept came from a scientist named John C. Willey in the 50s and 60s. Willey was aiming to study the reaction of the brain in the absence of stimulus.
So for someone that's never floated, the first thing you're going to think of when you get into the tank is, oh my God, why can't I relax? And that's exactly the point. The environment itself is odd. It's like nothing you've ever experienced on this earth. And so for me, or for most first-time floaters, I think the first half, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, maybe even a couple times, you may exist in that state where you're just hearing that the kind of heightened traffic in your mind, and it's annoying.
Floating is one of the newest trends in treating all kinds of ailments, both mental and physical, as Gangloff knows on a personal level.
Mentally, it's a known treatment for PTSD, anxiety, depression, insomnia. Physically, it's really good for anyone that has chronic pain, especially chronic back pain because of the low gravity environment. It's also very good for recovery, sore muscles, and all of that stuff. And then kind of the more emotional or mental side is people have kind of mystical or religious experiences. They're much more creative after floating in the tank. And they have a real improved capacity for visualization into the future.
Gangloff said for him, the absence of stimuli allowed him to reflect on the scripts running in his mind, which govern his behavior, how he feels, how he thinks, and how he acts.
And what you're able to do in that environment, because you're so alone, you're not distracted by anything, you're able to kind of analyze each one of those scripts and ask yourself hey, is this good? Is this bad? Is this working for me? Where did this come from, and do I still need it? And I would say, 80-90% of those cases, they were just scripts that I was carrying around from being in combat that I didn't need anymore. In fact, they were making me miserable. And through the practice of floating, I've found that you can really kind of repair and replace those scripts, and that's what changes that underlying happiness, really.
Reporting for Spartan TV, I'm Miette Weir.